last EdPuzzle of the session here. So we're going to spend EdPuzzle8 going over how to create your research proposal, some good design tips for putting together PowerPoints in general, whether it's for a course or for work. Then we'll look at the content that needs to go in your actual presentation, what your expectations are for the presentation itself, and we'll look at the grading rubric, and then finally we'll look at how to record your presentation and attach that recording to the submission folder, which is going to be a necessary extra step this session since we don't have any synchronous meetings or face-to-face meetings to present to each other with. That actually gives you somewhat of an advantage in that if you record your presentation and it didn't go well, then you can just record it again. And so many of us are no longer in face-to-face courses where we are watching typical presentations at the end of the semester where everyone's coming together and going one at a time to present a PowerPoint of whatever presentation and project that they've been doing. If you have ever experienced that or seen PowerPoints in the workplace or some other environment, you know that a PowerPoint presentation can either be bearable and hopefully interesting and move quickly, or seem like it moves quickly at least, or they can really be painful if someone's not well prepared, if their PowerPoint isn't well designed. And so we're going to go over some basic designing tips that you can use with any PowerPoint presentation or other types of media presentation that you might be doing, both in school and after school since you guys are graduating. But you are expected to use all of these tips and apply it to the design of your PowerPoint for this research proposal. But just know that these are all good tips and they apply essentially to all domains and environments that you might use a PowerPoint in. And so the first tip that I'm going to give you is to keep it simple. If you're comfortable with using PowerPoint, you might have used or be in the practice of using some of the tools in PowerPoint like animations. Animations are kind of a double-edged sword. They can make your PowerPoint flow really nicely, but more often they're really distracting. And also they commonly malfunction when you're actually in the presentation. So I don't encourage you to use any animations within your PowerPoint to transition between slides or to present new information. We also want to use sentence fragments if possible and not whole sentences. This is not a paper. You are not expected to write in full sentences. Rather, you just want to give your readers or your audience rather, the information that they need without putting too much text up there, which is actually the next tip coming up. And so it's perfectly fine to use sentence fragments as long as it makes sense. You want to keep your slides themselves simple. You don't want to load as much information onto a slide as possible. Each slide should have a lot of negative space or what we call white space. And you'll see on this slide here that there is a lot of negative space all around the text here. And what that does is it makes it really obvious where the text is, and it allows the audience to focus on the stuff that's there instead of being distracted and having to look at a number of different visual points throughout the slide. And so you don't want your slides to be too busy. And I'm going to keep emphasizing this throughout all of these tips, but do not trust PowerPoint default templates. They do not always adhere to these tips and produce a good PowerPoint presentation. So the second thing, beyond just keeping it simple, not loading your slides up with too much, is that images and figures are helpful. They make it interesting, they can help illustrate points, and they give your audience something to look at while you're talking. And so here are just some examples of how we can use images. You might just have a general image that helps kind of support the information and text that you're presenting. Same thing here. And so these images are directly relevant to what's being discussed, and they just give the audience something interesting to look at while you are talking. The snipping tool is great. If you have never used the snipping tool, it's available on all Windows computers. And I'll just go ahead and get a new share here. To show you where this might be on your computer. And so I actually already have it open here, but on your Windows computer, if you want to go to search and just type in snip, it'll pull up this snipping tool. And what this snipping tool will allow you to do is just grab images of anything, and then you can copy and paste them into your PowerPoint presentation. And so this might be helpful if you have an image you need to snip out of a picture that you found online, so you don't want the whole picture, or if perhaps one of your articles that was in your literature review has a good graph or table or diagram or something that you'd like to use. But the snip is a great tool to use for PowerPoint and a number of other things on the computer. So I just like to point that out. As I just briefly mentioned, you want the image to be directly relevant to the information that you're presenting in that slide. And so this is an image that's been on a previous presentation for a research proposal, and it serves to confuse the audience because I'm not sure how a faucet demonstrates a hypothesis. And so you don't want your images to be too silly, although getting a laugh out of your audience is a great thing. And you want them to be directly relevant. And so you'll see in the better examples we have over here, these images are directly depicting what the information, the language in these slides actually saying, and more so, I'm sure, what the presenter is actually saying. SmartArt is another great tool to use within PowerPoint, and Microsoft Word has it as well. And if you've never played around with SmartArt, I am going to encourage you to play around and at least use it one time within this research presentation that you're giving. And I would bet that you'll, after playing around with it, want to use it more than once. And so I will go ahead and show you where the SmartArt is in PowerPoint, and it can be used to illustrate a number of different things. And so really you can use this illustration for something that you might have only been able to say in words. You can take words and illustrate them in a more interesting way using this SmartArt. And so SmartArt is under Insert. You'll see up here under my taskbar. It's right here, SmartArt. And you'll see that there's a number of different types of SmartArt that you can do. And so these are fun things to play around with to help make lists or show a preview or to show relationships or cycles like your procedure or things of that nature. And so you got to play around with this for at least one thing within your presentation. And I didn't mean to insert that. Okay, so we like images, the snipping tool is great, and SmartArt is also a really good thing. It's easy to use within PowerPoint. And so these are some examples of SmartArt in previous research presentations that have been utilized very well. We see the SmartArt here is demonstrating a relationship, and the SmartArt here is just using, being used to more interestingly illustrate some bullets, what would have just been regular text bullets. And so these are very easy things to create, and you can see how that's more interesting to look at than just simply lots of words and bullets. Just as an FYI, and I won't elaborate on it too much because I'm not worried about it for this presentation, but if you were to do a PowerPoint presentation in your career or in the workforce, taking images directly offline, some of those are going to be copyrighted, and so if you're doing this in the real world, like a real research presentation or a presentation at work, you would want to make sure that you're not using a copyrighted image. Otherwise, it's very easy to go and search Google Images for something and find a relevant image to paste up there, which I actually do all the time. Okay, tip number 3 is limit your bullet points and text. You do not want to have too much information on your slide. the audience should be listening to you and paying attention to you and just looking at the slide to gain some general information to give them something to look at. If there's so much information on the slide that they're having to spend a long time reading it, people are incapable of reading something and listening to someone at the same time. And so essentially they're either going to not be able to listen to you or they're not going to be able to read what's on the slide. And so what's the point? And so some general kind of guidelines for how much you should have on a slide, that you don't want to have any more than 5 bullets. We see over 10 here, and so that's too many bullets for a slide. And you also don't want to have really long spans of text, like really long sentences or even paragraphs, or you just want to limit the amount of text that's actually on your slide. It's too much. It's not going to be effective, and your audience is going to be disinterested by having to read all that. So no more than 5 bullets is what I'll expect on a single slide in your presentation, and no like really long paragraphs or long repeated sentences. On the flip side, you don't want to have so little text without any interesting images in the slide that there's no information for the audience to look at. And then again, not enough there to help guide your explanation, to help guide you along so that you remember what to say next. And so some interesting examples here from previous presentations, this previous research here. This is good in that the presenter had limited text. There's a lot of white space here. It's a simple slide, which is what we want, but it doesn't really give the audience much information. And what ended up happening is there wasn't really enough information on this slide to guide the speaker and remind them or prompt them for what they were supposed to say. And so they kind of got lost. Here, I'm not sure why we have a slide that just says results with the block around it. So that doesn't really have any information on it, and it's a pointless slide. And so you don't want to have too much information that your audience is busy reading the entire time while you're talking and explaining the bullets, but you don't want to have so little information that there's nothing there and the slide itself is kind of pointless. Now, if we had taken this previous research slide and perhaps given a little bit more information on the bullets or given some interesting visuals to look at, then that would have improved the effectiveness of that slide a little bit. So here are some good examples of slides that had a good ratio of text, enough white space, but were still interesting and had enough information here. And so here we see just bullets. There's no really long sentences. They're actually just defining some of the terms that were relevant to their literature reviews here. Here we see their, again, we see fragmented sentences, which is fine because the presenter is going to be the one elaborating in full sentences and explaining everything. But we see that we've got the right amount of bullets here, and then it's supported with an interesting image for the audience to look at. Here, this one's a little bit more complicated, but we have a smart art here combined with an image, and then it has some text throughout for the audience to read, but more so the presenter is just going to be explaining and elaborating on the relationship that the smart art is showing. But through all of these, you'll see that there's they're interesting to look at. They're not overloaded with text. There's plenty of white space. Okay, tip number 4, using the right color combinations. And so the interesting thing about your presentation or your PowerPoint, when people look at it, should not be the colors. The interesting thing should be the information that you have there, the narrative that you're putting along with it, and hopefully some images and visuals that you're providing with them. And so the PowerPoint templates are not really effective or well designed in most instances. I would say about a quarter of the templates are usable the way that they are, and the other 3/4 of them use color combinations of warm and cool colors that make it very hard to read depending on the lighting that you're in. And so don't assume that just because you're choosing one that PowerPoint created that it's a good one. Most of them aren't. And so let's look at different color combinations and how that makes between the background and the text color. and how that makes the actual slide and the words on it easier or harder to read. And so a cool background, we see the color wheel over here, would be, you know, on this side, with warm text, definitely draws attention to the text, but it's really sensitive to lighting and hard to read. And so if you were to be watching this in the dark, like if someone had turned off the lights in the room and you were watching this with very little lighting in the room, it would be easy to read this yellow here. However, if you're sitting in a brightly lit room, the light is actually going to drown out the warm text and people are going to have a really hard time reading it. So if you're in a classroom where all the lights are on, or someone's watching this on their computer with all their lights on, it's going to be very hard to detect this background color. And so cool background with warm text doesn't work all the time. And the point is that you want a PowerPoint presentation that people can easily see and read regardless of the lighting in their house. So cool and warm isn't the best option. The opposite of warm background and cool text colors are pretty much just hard to read in any light. And so this is a PowerPoint template color with the orange and the blue text here, and it's really straining on the eyes, and it's not easy to read at all. So you want to avoid those also. A dark background with light text can be effective, and I use them sometimes, but they also depend on the lighting. And so again, if you're in a brightly lit room, it's going to be hard to read the text. They work best for rooms that have the lighting dimmed. And so this will be easy to read if there's very little light, but if it's really bright, wherever your audience is, they're not going to be able to read the text. And so the safest bet to go with is always a light background and a dark text that's not in a crazy color like orange or red. And so whatever template you use or whatever design you come up with on your own, you need to make sure it's easy to read for the audience to read the text in all lighting. So a light background with dark text is always the way to go. Again, we want to be aware of the template. So these are common templates that are used in PowerPoint. You see multiple issues with this, okay? So here, the title is a cool color on top of a cool color. And so I have a very hard time reading the title here. We also see that the text within the body of the slide is easy to read because it's a light background and a dark font, but it overlaps with this header, this purple header up here, and so you can't read the first line. And so that's not a very good PowerPoint presentation to use unless you're going to make sure that you've got it all in the right places so it doesn't overlap and it's easy to read. If I was using this one, I would have to move the body of the text down so it doesn't overlap, and I'd have to change the color of the title up here so that it stood out more on the background. Here, using an orange background is really abrasive, and having an orange background with white text is hard to read in most lighting, and so that's not a good one. So just because they've got these things set up doesn't mean that they're good PowerPoint templates. You need to pick one that adheres to the tips that we're covering here. Tip number 5 is to make your font easy to read. A lot of times people want to cram so much information onto their slides that they have to end up making the font really small. And we're striving to not have that many words itself on these slides. And so really the benchmark for the size font you should have that we hold in most professional settings is 22 to 24 font. We're watching this on a computer, but if someone was to be sitting in the middle of a room and watching this in a classroom or a boardroom or some other type of professional setting, someone that's in the middle or the back is not going to be able to read anything that's smaller than 24. And so if you have 16 font, only the people sitting in the front are going to be able to read it. And so no font should be smaller than 22, even the smaller bullets. And so usually I make 24 and 22, and then everyone all over can read that easily without having to strain their eyes. Again, you got to be careful of the defaults because depending on how many bullets you do and how many levels, so how many indents the bullets go in, PowerPoint will start making the font really small, like 16, sometimes it'll go to 12. So no one's going to be able to read that, which defeats the purpose of having it up there in the first place. So make sure your font's not smaller than 22 in any place on your PowerPoint slide. You also don't want to like switch fonts or font sizes more than 2 times. It becomes really distracting to the audience and to the reader, or to the audience rather. And then the type of font that you choose can be important as well. This is kind of common sense. You don't want to choose a font that's like ultra bold and all in caps. It's just hard for people to read. So really what professional world recommends is any type of sans serif font, which is actually a font that's made for a presentation. You can see that there's a little bit more spacing in between the letters than say a Times New Roman, which is made to be read in paragraphs. It's kind of a mix of bold and not bold, and then it has some spacing in between. But either way, just don't pick a distracting font that got curly cues or is too bold or too narrow and fine. Number 6, need to include a title, a preview, and a closing slide. And so we're going to go over all the content slides that actually present your presentation itself, but any presentation that you're giving using PowerPoint or really any other means of presenting, if your presentation is longer than 5 minutes, you need to give your audience a preview slide at the beginning, like I do when I give you all the agenda slides for these EdPuzzles. And essentially, after going to the title slide, that just lets your audience know what you guys are going to be looking at and in what order and how long it's going to take, so that they know what to expect, and it'll help make sense of the rest of the slides as they come along. And they'll also know if they have a question about something or they feel like you left something out, they'll know that it's still coming and they don't have to stop and interrupt you to ask a question about your methods if you've told them at the beginning that you're going to get to the methods after you discuss your research questions. And so look at an example of this. So this is a preview slide. So this would be the second slide in the presentation after the title slide, which includes the title of your paper and your name. And so this preview slide is using a SmartArt. SmartArt's a great thing to use for preview slides. And so this just shows people what you're going to be talking about and in what order. And so that's going to be required for this presentation. You also want a closing slide. You've ever seen a PowerPoint presentation where someone gets to the end and they click next and it just the PowerPoint presentation ends and it says end of slide and there's no official slide there, it just kind of exits. It's kind of awkward. And so you need a closing slide at the end so that you have something up on the screen as you're thanking people. Usually if you were face-to-face with people or even on a synchronous online meeting, that closing slide would be what you would look at while people ask questions, so that there's something to look at and it's not awkward. So you'll need a closing slide at the very end of your presentation that's essentially thanking us. It can prompt for questions, which will be for pretend here, since no one will be watching synchronously with you to ask questions. But you can also provide your contact info if people have questions about your presentation that you didn't have time to answer. You can provide your email so people can contact you after the fact. And then sometimes it's good to have an interesting image or visual on this closing slide so that, again, people have something interesting to look at while you talk, or just exit the stage or exit to the front of the room, wherever you are. So we got to have a title slide, a preview slide, and then a closing slide at the end to prevent any awkwardness by abruptly ending the presentation. Tip number 7, and this is probably, besides the font and the color choices, the most common error that students make, is that the PowerPoint isn't well proofread, and they contain inconsistencies and errors. And to people like me, or to most audience members in general, that's really distracting. If someone notices that you have periods on some stuff and no periods in other stuff, or that the title in one of your slides is capitalized, but it's not capitalized in another one, they start attending to those little things and paying attention to them, and then don't pay as much attention to you. And so we just need to be professional and make everything consistent. So you want to make sure that all your titles are capitalized in the same manner. So on each and every slide, I don't care if your titles are not capitalized at all. I don't care if you capitalize them just the proper words, like you would a title in APA, the title of your paper. I don't care if it's in all caps. Whatever you choose, it just needs to be consistent across every single slide that you have in the presentation. You also need to be consistent with your use of periods. So you don't want to put periods at the end of sentence fragments that aren't sentences. And if there is a sentence and you put a period there, then you want to make sure you put periods at all other sentences that you have also. So again, it's just being consistent. And obviously, you don't want to make any typos or other obvious errors throughout your presentation here. Another tip is to present bullets one at a time if you have multiple bullets on a page. So this helps you and the audience follow along. So when you see one bullet, you elaborate on it and say what you're going to say. And then when you click, it'll prompt you with the next bullet. And that helps you not get ahead of yourself and also not forget to say what you were supposed to say. And so we see that I've introduced one bullet here, and then I just threw in two more. And so you can use animations if you're comfortable with that. But again, I don't recommend it. A lot of the times these animations do funky things when we're actually presenting. And so I recommend just using separate slides, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. And so you can either put all of the bullets on there and emphasize them in bold or underline, or maybe a slightly different color, one at a time. Or you can, let's see, like this. So I see I'm talking about this bullet, and then I would move on to the next bullet. And so it's leading my audience along, and it's also leading me along. And it's obvious which text here I'm emphasizing and discussing. Or you can just introduce it as I did before, one bullet at a time. And so let me show you how to do this. What you want to do is you want to create your slide with all of the information on it. And then you want to make copies of that slide. So escape here, okay. And so if you look over here, you'll see that for this slide, I have multiple different copies of it. And so what I would do if I was making this slide and I wanted to present it one at a time, I would take this slide and just control copying. I'm going to copy it and paste it multiple times. And then on this first one here, I could highlight this piece. And then on the second slide here, I could highlight this piece. And on the third slide, I could highlight this piece. Or on the first slide, I could only show one bullet. And then on the second slide, I could just show the second bullet. And on the third slide, I could add in the third bullet, so that it ends up, when you go through them, presenting them one at a time. And so this is a really, really helpful thing. It is almost as helpful to you as it is to the audience, and I recommend it for pretty much any slide that has more than 2 bullets. So if you've got a design or a template that you like and it's a little wonky, the colors aren't right or the text is right and isn't quite right and gets really small, PowerPoint has an interesting tool you can use called the master slide. And so if you go up here and go to view, it essentially lets you edit the defaults on a slide template. So to go look at the master slide, I'm going to go up here and go to view. And then you can go to slide master. And you'll see here on the side and that it shows me every single type of slide layout that's within this template. And if I go in and want to edit some stuff with this layout, say, let's see, this text is too small. So this needs to be 24, and this other one can be 22. And then all these other levels need to be 22 too, because no one's going to be able to read a 12-point font in a presentation. And so once I fix it here, that type, anytime I use that type layout slide in this template, it's going to have these default settings. And so you can change some of the defaults throughout all of the layouts on the slides that you're using. And so that's really helpful, that you don't have to edit each individual slide, especially if your presentation is long. I need to close master view to get back to where I was. And go to presenter view so that you guys can't see all the rest of the stuff. Here we go. So after you've gotten a really good design for your PowerPoint, it's interesting, it's got the right amount of information, it's easy for people to read, your presentation is just as important, almost if not more important, than your PowerPoint design. And so the biggest error that people make, and it makes it so boring and hard to listen to, is if you read directly from your PowerPoint for the majority of your presentation. It suggests that you're poorly prepared, that you don't know what to say, and so you have to read through your bullets one by one, verbatim. And it also kind of illustrates that you don't know enough about your material and about what's on your slide to elaborate beyond what's on the slide. Mostly, it's just really, really boring to listen to. And so the idea is that you want to use each bullet to help cue yourself, and you can read it or read part of it, but then you need to elaborate on it after the fact. Or you can just allude to the bullet, maybe highlight it on the slide, and then explain it in more detail in other words without even actually reading the bullet verbatim. But what you don't want to do is just to read through the information on your slides without adding anything, just reading it, you know, like a reading at church or like you're reading a book. You're going to lose your audience's interest, and if that's all you're doing, then what do they need you for, right? They could just read it on their own. They don't need you to read it for them. So instead, you want to mention a bullet and then elaborate on that point with discussion that you have prepared. And so you need to practice what to say, especially if you're a little nervous about presenting. The more you practice, the less anxiety you're going to have. Typically, I would practice a presentation if I was giving a professional presentation more than 10 times. And so if you're really comfortable presenting, you might only need to practice it 5 times. If you're really anxious about presenting or talking in front of people, you might need to practice it 20 times. Either way, you need to know what you're going to say and be really comfortable doing it. So practice, practice, practice. So let's just sum up everything that we've covered here and these tips for good PowerPoint design before we move on to what content you actually need from your research proposal and your slides. And so a good presentation, it's going to be interesting, it's going to have images, and you're not going to be reading directly from your slides the entire time because that's not interesting. It needs to be easy to gather information from, and so it needs to have a good text ratio and some empty space so that your audience isn't having to read paragraphs and ignoring you. It needs to be easy to read, see, with the font large enough and with the color scheme easy to read and perceive in all different types of lighting. And you don't want to distract them with stuff on your slides just to take up room and make it silly or interesting. That's unrelated. It's just going to distract your audience. They're not going to listen to you. They're going to look at these random images and they're going to end up confused. It needs to be professional, consistent, and without errors. So again, consistency throughout your capitalization, your use of punctuation, the way you use bullets, and making sure there's obviously no typos throughout. And then it's designed with the audience in mind, so much like when you're writing the literature review and you're thinking about having to explain this to someone that doesn't know anything about the topic. It's the same thing when giving a presentation. Your audience doesn't know what's coming, they don't know what to expect, and they don't know anything about the topic. And so you need to make the structure of the presentation really obvious by having a beginning and an end, title slide, introducing yourself in the title, a preview slide telling them what's coming and in what order, and then a closing slide that provides your information and makes it less awkward as you exit. You also want to think about, just like when you're writing, and we'll talk about this more in a second, is that you want to tell them what they need to know, but only what they need to know to understand your study. And so your literature review and your IRB application have a lot of details in there. Not all of those little fine-grained details are going to be really important for your audience to know to understand the broader concept of your study. So we'll get more to that in a minute. So let's talk about the actual presentation that you're going to be creating and making now that we've covered all the general basics of PowerPoint design. So what is the purpose of this or any proposal presentation, and what goes into your proposal presentation? And so our purposes for this class are multifaceted. One, you want to practice academic presenting, in which you practice how to go through your PowerPoint and elaborate on the bullets and talking in front of people, or in this case, talking on a recording. You also want to practice creating a good and well-designed PowerPoint presentation itself, which we just covered. But the purpose of a research proposal in general, which you might give to a company, which you might give at a conference, which you might give at a job interview, is that you want to explain your proposed study to an audience. You want to say, there's this problem. I want to run this study. I'm going to do this to run this study using this and looking at these people. And this is why I expect to find, this is why it's important. So that your audience comes away thinking, oh, that's a really important problem to address considering all that other stuff they said. And this study they came up with seems like a good way to do that. And so again, your audience hasn't read your paper. You could think of your audience as any of your peers in this class or anyone in your family that hasn't read or peer reviewed your paper and doesn't know anything about it, but you want to tell them the background and explain your study. You want them to come away thinking it's really important and that you've got a good design. And so let's look at the content that's going to be going into your presentation. Essentially, it's the content that's in your research proposal and in the order that it appears in your research proposal, which makes it pretty straightforward. And so the first thing you're going to present after your title page and your preview page is you're going to present the problem. What's the broad topic and the problem that we're addressing? Then we'll give them the findings from the literature. Then you'll explain your current study. You'll tell them the methods you're going to use in that study, and then what your expected results and implications are. And so let's go over each one of these in more detail so that you know exactly what you need to put in this PowerPoint presentation. So the problem. So the first couple slides after your preview slide is going to broadly introduce your topic, the problem, and any terms they might have. So at the beginning of your paper, most of you have kind of a grabbing sentence that broadly introduces the problem or your topic in general. 33% of adults in the United States have been diagnosed with a mental health disorder, something like that, okay? So you want to grab the audience's attention, maybe with a question or a visual or a statistic like that, and you can take that from your paper. Then you want to introduce, after telling them this problem, you want to get a little bit more narrow and introduce any terms that are crucial for them to know in order to understand your study. And so if you're doing a study on substance abuse disorder, that's probably an important thing to define or describe to your audience before you get any further, because they don't know what it is. They won't be able to understand anything without understanding that first, right? You don't need to go into really specific definitions that might be only relevant to one of the specific studies that you covered in your literature review. Rather, you just want to explain any broad terms or concepts that's really crucial to your study and topic that an ordinary person wouldn't know. And so all this info here on the first two slides is going to be from the first paragraph or two, depending on how much general background information you had of your literature review. So you don't want to give them too much. You don't want to put all of that information from those first two paragraphs in the bullets. Just give them enough, tell them the issue, and then a little bit about the general topic. After that, you're going to get more narrow and you're going to tell them about the findings from your literature review. And so we can go 3 to 5 slides for this. So you want to give them the main takeaways and the findings from the previous research. And so in the previous slide, you're telling them what the problem is and then explaining the background a little bit. And then you're going to say, you know, previous research on this has found X, Y, and Z. And perhaps X, Y, and Z are all on different slides, and that would make up your 3 slides. And so generally, you want to talk about what the previous research looked at. And so, you know, some studies have compared postpartum depression rates across socioeconomic statuses and across multiple races. Most of the findings from those studies indicate that A, B, and C. And so you'll see that I just talked about kind of a concept that studies have compared postpartum depression rates across races and across SESs, and then I told them the findings relevant to that. So you want to try to present the previous research and the findings conceptually. You don't want to just start saying, in one study, 455 participants took a survey and, et cetera, and results indicated that, blah, blah, blah. In a second study, 503 participants were recruited and researchers asked them to, that's not interesting. They don't need to know all of that. They can go read the paper if they want to know it. Rather, you want to give them information about the research topics and what the studies looked at and what the findings were, and try to avoid walking them through all the studies in your lit review sequentially. It's boring. And so just FYI for these literature review slides, you do not need to include any references or in-text citations for our purposes. If you were presenting at an actual research conference, you would need to include citations and references, but I'm not requiring you to do that here. So after you get the background, tell them what the previous research has found, then you're going to introduce them to the current study or the proposed study. And so this is essentially the last paragraph that you added on to your introduction, where you are explaining the purpose of your study. So knowing all of this research, my study is going to look at blah, because it's important to understand how X affects Y in order to provide treatment recommendations or enable to develop new interventions or et cetera. You have all of that in that paragraph. And so essentially you're just taking that paragraph and you're representing it across 2 slides. You want to tell them the purpose of your study, what it's looking at, and why anyone should care. And then you want to tell them specifically what your research questions are and what the hypotheses are. So this is one slide, and this is another. Just as an aside, you don't have to paraphrase your own writing from your paper. So you don't need to reword your own words at this point. You can take it directly out of your paper, just keeping in mind that you don't want to have all these really long sentences. The research questions you can copy paste directly out of your paper. They need to be complete sentences, otherwise the audience won't understand them. But for some of the other stuff from the lit review or the background that you're taking out of your paper, you can take it directly out of your paper without re-paraphrasing it. But again, consider that pulling whole sentences or groups of sentences out of your paper is not going to turn out to be an effective PowerPoint. It's going to be too wordy. Okay, so after you introduce your current study, now you're going to get into the methods. You're saying, this is the problem, this is what previous research has found. In light of that, my study wants to look at this because knowing this will help X, Y, and Z, and this is how I'm going to do it. And so on 4 slides, you're going to describe who your participants will be, describe what your measures will be, describe your procedure, and then have a 4th slide that just broadly goes over your design and proposed analysis. And so again, we don't want too much information on these slides. We want the gist of each. You want to tell us how many participants, where you're going to get them, and generally what their characteristics are going to be like. You can just list your different measures in bullet points here or in a smart art, and then you can elaborate on them all verbally throughout your presentation. For your procedure, a smart art's a really good way to illustrate that. So most of your procedures are very long, which they needed to be, but to fit into one slide here, you want to break it down into basic steps or time points in a smart art, and then you can elaborate on each one in your narrative and in your presentation. And then to design the proposed analysis, really what you want to do is just break down to them what your independent and dependent variables are, and then tell them the specific statistical analysis that you're going to use for each research question, which was either your ANOVA or your regression or both or whatever it ended up being. And so not everything from these 2 sections needs to go in here, like confidentiality and stuff like that, just this basic stuff. And so each of these is on a slide, and again, we're making it interesting to look at as possible. And then to finish, you're going to have 1 to 2 slides that illustrate what your results are expected to show. And so that's actually at the end of your analysis section for most of your papers, and what these results mean. So essentially you're saying, this is what my study is going to look at. This is how I'm going to do it. And now we're here, we're going to say, after doing that, I think results are going to show X, Y, and Z. And that would mean, if they did, that we would need to identify these groups of people that are at higher risk for postpartum depression or substance abuse disorder relapse or whatever, et cetera, et cetera. And so just a slide to finish up what you think will happen and why that matters, and what we would do with that. So those are your implications. And so that's all the actual content that you need to include from your research proposal in that exact order. And as you're going through all that, again, you need to keep in mind your audience. And so what information is important to include and what information is important not to include, since you're taking paragraphs and paragraphs of text and trying to fit it into a slide with maybe 4 bullets. And so you just need to keep in mind your audience. They just want to understand the background enough to understand your study, and then understand how you're going to do the study, and then understand what you think you might find and why that's important. So lots of the details that you put in the IRB, or maybe in some of your method sections about de-identifying data and stuff like that, that's not really important for your audience here, rather your audience here. Your audience is under the assumption that you're going to do everything ethically and that you're abiding by all regulations and basic guidelines for research. So you don't have to tell them that. That's an assumption. What you do want to tell them is the crucial information that they need to know to comprehend and understand the topic of your study and how you're going to do it. So remember that in addition to all of those content slides we talked about, you're required to have a title slide that says the title of your paper and your name. Second slide is you need to have an outline, preview, or agenda slide, all the same thing. That gives them a general idea of what you're going to talk about and in what order and how long it's going to take you. And then you need a closing slide at the end that thanks them, asks for questions, provides contact info, or an interesting picture for them to look at as you're finishing up your presentation and exiting wherever you are. So your presentation needs to be 10 to 15 minutes. It should be no less time than 10 minutes. It should not be 9 minutes, and it should not be 16 minutes. When you're presenting in the real world, many different people are giving research presentations within an allotted time frame. And so essentially, if you take too long, then you run into some other people's time, or you don't leave time for questions, or you end up having to rush through the very end of your presentation. And if it's not long enough, then people end up seeming kind of confused and wondering a lot more about your study. And really to explain all of that information that I just prompted you to explain, it would be very hard to do it in less than 10 minutes unless you were unprepared and forgot what you were going to say and just ran through your slides quickly without elaborating on stuff and explaining it to your audience in an interesting way. And so you need to practice giving your presentation and make sure that walking through it, practicing, that you can do it within 10 to 15 minutes. Here is the grading rubric for this assignment. And so you see here the first 20 points go towards just the PowerPoint itself. And so we've got criteria for design, making sure you don't have too many words, that doesn't have any typos, and you're consistent in all your usage of grammar and titles and capitalization and punctuation and bullets and stuff of that matter. The design is clean and easy to read, so that comes back to the template. Then we get into the content here, and so this is all in order, and it's what we all just discussed. So you got the title slide, a preview slide, the problem, which you can take up to 2 to 4 slides to explain, depending on how complex your problem is and how many different topics or concepts it relies on. Then you got your lit review, which you are describing, remember, the findings from the research in a way where you're not just going through it study by study. You're telling us what we know, what previous studies have looked at, and what the findings are generally. Take about 3 to 5 slides to do that. Then we have 2 slides introducing your current study, including the purpose, and then the second slide with your research questions and hypotheses. Your methods in 4 slides, participants, measures, procedure, and then your design analysis, discussion in 1 to 2, and then of course your closing slide. The last 10 points are on your presentation, and so you do have a criteria here for time, and really what that illustrates is that you've practiced. And so if you practice 1 time and you know that it took you 20 minutes to go through your presentation, then you need to keep practicing and modifying what you say, maybe the notes you have to help guide you along to make sure you get within the allotted time. And so that's another thing that's crucial for practice is you need to know how long it takes you, and then you need to modify from there as necessary. How prepared you are, so it's really obvious when people practice. It doesn't matter how nervous you get. Being nervous is okay. I don't count off for that. But the more nervous you are, the more you need to practice, and that will help. But really it's preparedness, so you should know what to say. You should know how to elaborate on your bullet points. You should know what order you're going to say things in. That all comes through practice. And then I have a whole criteria here for not reading directly from your slides, which again comes back to practice. But it's a pet peeve and it's a terrible habit. And so again, you can read some of your bullets as long as you don't just read through your bullets in order, and as long as you elaborate on the bullets throughout your presentation. So this whole thing is worth 30 points. So now what we're going to talk about is how to record this thing and submit it so that you can be done with school forever. Oh, I got ahead of myself. Practicing your presentation. You can tell I didn't practice this presentation. You want to practice it by yourself, saying it out loud, not in your head. Say it out loud as you will when you're recording and narrating your presentation. And so generally what recording it's going to entail, and I'll give specific instructions for 2 ways to record in a second, is that you're going to screen share your PowerPoint, just like I'm doing here, and then record yourself narrating your presentation. So essentially it's just going to be like any of my EdPuzzles. There's lots of ways to do this. I'm going to show you how to use Zoom and Screencast-O-Matic, which are both free and you have access to. If you have any other apps, maybe on your Apple computer or something else that you're more familiar with and already know how to screenshot and use with narration, that's totally fine. But these 2 are going to be probably the easiest to do and produce the best recorded presentations. And so let's look at using Zoom. And so hopefully most of you have used Zoom before in your other classes. If you haven't, it's really easy to use, and I've got real explicit instructions here. Regardless of whether you've used it in a previous class, you probably do not have it installed on your desktop, which you need to start your own meeting and record it. So the first thing you need to do is to go to the Mercer Zoom website, to the download page, and download the Zoom desktop application. After you've downloaded it, you want to go into your desktop and click on it, obviously. Then after you click on it, it's going to ask you to sign in. You need to sign in with your Mercer credentials through SSO. And so here's the sign-in screen. Do not put your Mercer stuff here. That doesn't work. You need to click sign in with SSO here. We have to sign in through your Mercer account. So sign in with SSO. It's going to prompt you to enter your company domain, and that's Mercer. And then once you continue, it's just going to prompt you to sign in with your Mercer name and password. So the same stuff that you use for My Mercer and for Canvas. Then once you're signed in and have it open, you're going to get this kind of home screen. And all you need to do to start a meeting in your home screen. So once you're ready to do your presentation and you practice it and it's all ready, open Zoom, sign in, and then you can just go ahead and click Start Meeting. So what that's going to do is it's going to start a meeting just with you. And so once you start the meeting, it looks just like this. You don't need to join your video unless you want to. I don't need to see your face. It's not required, and so you don't actually have to join any video, but you do need to join audio so that you can narrate your presentation. And so you would do that either here or here, same thing. You click on one of these, it's going to give you this option. And so if you have a good microphone on your computer or your webcam has a good microphone, you can just click computer audio and it should automatically turn it on. My webcam here at the office has terrible audio, and so I actually dial in with my phone, and so you can do that here also. After you have started a meeting and you've connected your audio, you need to open up your PowerPoint presentation on your computer. And then once you've got it open, you want to click Share, which is here at the bottom in the toolbar for your Zoom meeting. Click Share, and you want to opt to screen share your presentation. So once you click Share, it's going to open up all of the things that you have open on your computer. You don't want to necessarily share your screen, which will show me your entire screen, including your toolbar and everything else that's going on. What you really want to do is just find the PowerPoint presentation of your presentation and click on that, and it's going to share just your PowerPoint window. Once you've got it open and you've got your PowerPoint presentation screen shared, I would go ahead and go in your PowerPoint and go to Start Presentation and maximize the screen so I can't see all your PowerPoint settings. Not a huge deal if you don't, but go ahead and maximize your PowerPoint and start the presentation. And then once you're ready to begin your narration and your presentation, you want to go in your Zoom toolbar, go to More, which has these 3 little dots. And then up here, you want to record on this computer. And so what it's going to do is it's going to record an MP4 of your screen share along with any of the audio. And so once you click Record on this computer, it's going to start, and you should start with your presentation, and you can just use your arrow on your keyboard or your mouse, or just click in PowerPoint to go through your slides as you're giving the presentation. And so you should pretend you're giving that presentation as if you're giving it in a class or in some type of professional face-to-face environment. But again, don't worry, we won't be able to see you. So you're recording your presentation. Once you're done, you get to the end, you got your closing slide. You want to click End Meeting and go ahead and just end your Zoom meeting under the ... More toolbar. So same place, End Meeting is easy to find. It's the first thing, and it's in red. And once you end meeting, it's going to automatically stop the recording, obviously, and it's going to shut down your meeting. And then you'll see a little window pop up, and it's going to say that it's compressing and downloading your recording. It might also prompt you if you want to end the meeting for everyone or whatever, and that's fine. Yes, just end the meeting, turn it off, and then it's going to compress your recording, and then it's going to save it in your computer. And so if you recorded one, you realize you need some more practice, or you made a big boo-boo, do it again. That's the advantage of doing these recorded presentations, is that you're not you can have more than one try, and I won't even be able to see the ones before. And so to find your file of where your Zoom file went, you want to go, and this is for a Windows computer, obviously, but it will also still be under Documents in a Mac computer. So you want to go under your computer, go to Documents. There'll be a Zoom folder now under your Documents. Within your Zoom folder, if you only did one recording, you're just going to have one folder in there, and it starts with the date of your recording and the time. So you want to click on the folder for the recording you just did, and then within that folder there's going to be 3 files. There's an audio only file, there's a video only file, and then this Zoom _0 file is your audio and video file combined. And so that's the one that you need, that's your assignment. And so that's where that one is. And so I'll show you the submission folder in a second, but essentially you'll go into Canvas, attach a media file, and you'll go in and attach this file. You can also click on it and watch your own presentation if you want. Kind of brutal watching your own presentation. I don't even like watching my own ones, but you might opt to want to do that. If you can't get Zoom to work, or you don't feel like using Zoom, you can also use Screencast-O-Matic, which is a free app that you can do free 15-minute recordings on online. And so you can go to the website here, Once you go to the website, if you want to use it, you click Start Recording for Free, which is right on the main page. Then it'll take you another page, and you'll click Launch Screen Recorder, which is right in the middle, and Possible to Miss. That essentially will download the application to your computer. And then you can go, mine always downloads to the bottom toolbar in my web browser, but wherever yours goes, you want to launch the download, and it's going to like really quickly in about 10 seconds install this Screencast-O-Matic app, and it'll also have a desktop icon pop up on your desktop. Once you download it, typically it just automatically starts and opens the app. And so the app essentially looks like this little menu window. And so what you want to do is you want to open your PowerPoint just like you would have done with Zoom. And then once it's open on the Screencast-O-Matic kind of menu, it automatically defaults to screen, which means it's screen sharing and recording your screen. You wouldn't want to like webcam or both. So this is a screen share. It's automatically on that, but just double check. You'll also have this little microphone bar. When you speak into it, you'll be able to see if it goes up and down. You'll be able to see if your mic is working. I do not think that you can call in with your phone for this one. So if you don't have a mic, you'll need to use Zoom. And then once you're ready and you've got your PowerPoint open, this little black and white striped window essentially encompasses what's being captured in the screen share. And so you can make that bigger or smaller, move it around so that you're recording only a certain box or window in your screen. Once you're ready, you just want to go ahead and press record and start your presentation. When you're done with your presentation, you're going to press the pause button right here, and then it'll look like this, and you can click done. Once you click done, it's going to automatically open up this window that gives you the option to save and upload, which is what you want to do. So go ahead and click on it. And then you have two options. You can save as a video file, or you can upload the file to YouTube. It'll be quicker just to save it as a video file and then attach that video file to your submission. But if you don't have like a lot of space on your computer or something, you can go ahead and upload the video to YouTube, and then you can just attach the YouTube link to your recording in the submission folder. So either of these is fine. So to turn this thing in, as I mentioned before, you could use other methods of recording your presentation. I gave you 2 free recording devices that you have access to that include screen share and narration. If you've got some other idea that will achieve the same thing, that's fine. Whatever you do, you need to have a recording of you narrating your PowerPoint presentation in some form or another. If you want to go like old school and have someone videotape you presenting in person and attach that, or upload it to YouTube, that's fine, whatever. I just need to see you presenting, at least with your voice, through the PowerPoint presentation. So to submit the assignment, you can attach your recorded presentation either as a media, or as a video file, or a link to your recording on YouTube. And so if you opted to upload to YouTube, you can actually do that with Zoom as well. Both of those is fine. And so under the submission folder for this, you want to go to Submit Assignment, and then Attach Media File, Submission Folder, Media, Upload Record Media, Upload Media, Select Video File. I'm going to show you this in Canvas really quickly. So both Zoom and Screencast-O-Matic make recordings in MP4s, and so that's really easy and works within Canvas, and I can see it on all computers. If you use some type of different method and you end up with a .movie file, that will probably work on my computer in Canvas as well. If you end up with some other type of wonky file it's not guaranteed that it'll work through Canvas or that I will be able to look at it on my computer. And so if possible, just make sure any media recording that you have is in either an MP4 or a movie. Okay, so here is the assignment submission just to show you. So I've got the settings open so that you can pretty much like attach anything to here. And so if you're going to attach your media file, what you want to do is go under media, click record upload media. It's not wanting to work right now with my screen share on. After you click record upload media, it's going to give you another option. And I'll tell you what those options are in a second. It's going to give you another option. It's going to say upload media or record media. And so you want to upload media, and then you can find the video file of your recording and just attach it. You can also opt to attach a link to your recording on YouTube, and that would be here. You can just attach a website URL. If you don't have any space in your computer and you need to move your video files to Dropbox or to somewhere else, I've got a lot of options open here. Okay. So this presentation is the last thing due in this class, and hopefully the last thing due for your entire program. Remember, as I mentioned in the announcement, that it's due before midnight on Saturday, June 13th. I have to grade them Sunday morning so that I can submit grades on Sunday night. They're due by Monday morning. So if you haven't turned it in by Saturday night, I'm not going to be able to access it to grade it. You won't be able to receive a grade. So please keep in mind that you got to get this done a day earlier than you normally get some of your stuff done. So this is it. Good luck and have fun on this assignment. You guys have an advantage that no other capstone class has ever had, and that you get to record your presentation without having to do it in front of people face-to-face or in a synchronous Zoom meeting. So definitely take advantage of this opportunity. Being able to record yourself presenting is a really useful skill to know how to have. And then we'll be done with this course. So I wish you guys all the best of luck on your future endeavors, wherever you go from here. And I encourage you guys to please stay in touch or reach out to me if you need recommendations or some guidance for next steps now that you're done with your undergrad degree.